Hi, I'm D.C. Brown, minister for the Magnolia Church of Christ, located at 823 South Magnolia Boulevard in beautiful Magnolia, Texas. If this is your first time joining us, welcome. We're glad you're with us. You'll find previous lessons in this particular study, as well as some other messages. We have some special Bible studies, for instance, for our ladies. We have activities for children. We have some of our periods of worship together, including a series on one of the greatest parables of the New Testament. And you can access all of these at any time by going to our website, magnoliachurchofchrist.com, or you can always look us up on Facebook. And when possible, we want to invite you to come worship with us. We have activities for all ages, and we hope you'll want to join us in a period of worship. Our vision is to be a family of God that loves unconditionally, is united in service, and a beacon to the community. Once again, I'm glad that you're joining us today. Welcome to Bible Study Time. I hope you already have your Bible open to our text of 1 Samuel chapter 5, but if not, please go ahead and get your Bible out and be turning to 1 Samuel chapter 5. You might also want to get a pen and a notepad to take some notes on. If you need to pause the video to get the things that you need, go ahead and do that now. And while you're at it, don't forget a cup of coffee or some cold iced tea. And when you're ready, we'll begin with a word of prayer, and then we'll get right into the Our Father in heaven, as we come before you, we acknowledge that you are all-powerful. We acknowledge, Father, that you are in control of all things, that you are a gracious God, a loving God, and a merciful God. We are who we are because of you, and we give thanks to you for our lives. We know that all blessings come from you, and we give you thanks. We ask that you would continue to guide the hands of those who every day are battling the coronavirus pandemic. We ask you to keep them safe, keep them healthy. We appreciate all those that are doing things behind the scenes to make our lives as comfortable as possible, but particularly those who are ministering to those who are suffering and sick because of this terrible virus. We also ask, Father, that you give your guidance and your wisdom to the leaders of all the nations, all of whom are struggling with the same challenges and issues. We especially ask that you would give wisdom and guidance to our own President Trump and the policy decisions that he must make that affects all of us, both now and in the future. We know that you have a greater power than any power of fear that we may be gripped by. And you have a greater love that will conquer the hatreds and jealousies and strifes that constrain us. And so we ask your power and your love to be evident in this time of national anxiety. We ask for you to give us wisdom and understanding as we begin this period of study together. And we're thankful that you've given us a written record of all the ways that you have blessed those who have honored you. And we ask that you would bless us in this time of study. And may our study be an honor to your holy name. And we ask it all in the name of our Savior, Christ Jesus. Now, if you've been following along in our study, you know that chapters 4 and 5 and 6 take us through a 2-day war between the Israelites, who are under the domination of the Philistines. And they had this battle with the Philistines. And these chapters also tell us about what happens after this battle has taken place. Remember that we're very near the end of the period of time in the Bible that we refer to as the period of the judges. And keep in mind that a judge is to be understood as it's used in this context, primarily as someone that God raises up to deliver his people from bondage and oppression because they have repented of idolatry. They've repented of being disobedient to God. They've cried out to God. And in his loving kindness and in his mercy, God will raise up for them someone who will deliver them from those whom he has allowed to oppress them until they come to their senses and repent. And so each time we see a judge mentioned in this period of time, that's what we're talking about, someone that God has raised up to deliver them. And we're near the very end of that time period, the final two judges of Israel before Israel is going to be organized under a monarchy will be Eli, who is the judge at the time this battle begins. He's a 98-year-old judge and a high priest. And he'll be followed by Samuel, the prophet of whom this book is named. Now, the battle itself was recorded back in the 4th chapter, and we've already covered that. But let me just remind you that it was a disastrous defeat for the Israelites. Day 1, 4,000 Israelite soldiers are killed on the battlefield. The elders convene a council, trying to determine what has happened. They correctly conclude that they had been defeated by the Lord, chapter 4 and verse 3. And then very foolishly, they decide for themselves that what they need to do is send for the Ark of the Covenant to be brought from its place where it's intended to be in the tabernacle back in Shiloh and bring it to where they are, and so that it'll be with them as they go into battle the second day with the thought that now God will be with them and they'll be delivered. So on day 2, in spite of the fact that Phinehas and Hophni, the two sons of Eli, have indeed brought the Ark of the Covenant into the camp, things don't go the way that they hope. The Philistines have a massive victory. By the end of day 2, 30 more thousand Israelite soldiers will be killed in battle. And the two sons of Eli, Hophni and Phinehas, will be killed on that day, a single day, just as the prophet had said. And the ark will be captured by the Philistine armies. And so chapters 5 and 6 then go on to tell us what happened to the Philistines as a result of their capturing and then possessing the ark of God. Now let's talk a little bit about that expression, the ark of God. And keep in mind, we really don't know what it looks like. We have descriptions of how it was to be made, but we don't have a Polaroid or a Kodak photograph to look at and say, here it is. What we do have are those descriptions, and then beyond the descriptions of the ark being made, you might be interested to know that the ark will be mentioned another 100 times by name throughout the rest of the Bible. But here's where it gets a little confusing. When I say it's mentioned another 100 times by name, there are 18 different names by which the ark is identified. And we're not going to go into all 18 of those names. That's really not the purpose of this study. But it does go by 18 different names. The name that is usually referred to, the name that occurs more often than all the others, it's simply called the Ark of God. And that's found 35 times. The second most frequent name that refers to this ark is it's called the Ark of the Covenant of the Lord. And some 26 times it's identified in that way. But here's the interesting thing. In chapters 5 and 6, where we're dealing with the Philistines having possession of the ark, it's interesting that 7 times in these 2 chapters, it is called the Ark of the God of Israel. That's how the Philistines will refer to this ark. They understand, if not immediately, they will come to understand what it is that they have captured, what it is that they possess. It is going to be a time of great misery for them that they have this ark that they rightfully call the Ark of the God of Israel. Now remember that when the day began, on day 2 of the battle, remember that the Philistines hear a great shout that comes up from the camp of Israel. And they wonder what it means, and they come to understand that the Ark of the Covenant has been brought into the Israelite camp, and they're terrified. They said, God has come into the camp. And they said, woe to us, for nothing like this has happened before. That was chapter 4, 1 Samuel, and verse 7. And so on that second day of the battle, the Philistines fought fiercely. They fully expected that with God being with the Israelites, they were going to be defeated. But they also chose to die on the field of battle than to survive the loss and forced to become the slaves of the Israelites, who at that moment are their slaves. They'd rather die and be defeated by the God of Israel than to go into slavery. That's not, of course, what happens. God allows the armies of Israel to be defeated because of their disobedience and lack of faith and trust in Him, their ongoing idolatry, and we'll see that borne out at a later time. He allows 30,000 soldiers to die. He allows the ark to be captured and fall into the hands of the Philistines. And remember also that at the end of day 2, there is a lone survivor of the tribe of Benjamin that makes his way back to Shiloh, and he brings the terrible news to the citizens of Shiloh of all that had happened. And another cry rises up at the end of day 2, a cry so great that 90-year-old Eli, high priest, sitting in front of the tabernacle, hears the shouts and wonders what the meaning of it is, and he's told what happened that day, that Israel had been defeated in battle, that his sons had died, and that the ark had been captured. And so great was the shock upon hearing that the ark had been captured, he fell over and he broke his neck and he died. We also know that at the time that Phinehas' wife was pregnant, when she heard that Israel had lost the battle, that her husband had died, that the ark had been captured, she goes into hard labor. She gives birth to a child, a son that she will name Ichabod, and the name means no glory. And sadly, she dies in childbirth. Her dying words in chapter 4, verse 22, the glory has departed from Israel, for the ark of God was taken. And that's how this 4th chapter ends. Well, what becomes of the ark after it has fallen into the hands of the Philistines? If they viewed it at first as a spoil of war, if they viewed it at first as a trophy, they're going to have a change of heart and a much deeper understanding and respect for the ark before it's all over. They're not going to want to keep the ark of the God of Israel, as they refer to it, very long. And so that's how we begin the 5th chapter. And with that, let's go ahead and get into chapter 5, verse 1. Now the Philistines took the ark of God and brought it from Ebenezer to Ashdod. Ebenezer is the location where the armies of Israel had been encamped. Here is where the battle takes place. Remember that the Philistines are camped at Aphek, and right next to it is Ebenezer. But also remember that Ebenezer was a name that would not have been known by either side at the time this battle takes place. It's not going to get that name for another 20 years, but by the time the inspired writer tells us of the details of this particular battle and how the ark is captured, that was the name that the location was known by. And when we get to the 7th chapter, we'll see how it comes to have that name. So the ark is captured, taken from Ebenezer to a Philistine city called Ashdod. And at this point, it's probably going to be beneficial for us to take a look at a map and learn some things about the Philistines. This map represents the journeys that the Ark of the Covenant traveled as it was taken from Shiloh, where it was enshrined in the tabernacle by the priest Hophni and Phinehas, brought into the battle site at the camp of Israel at Ebenezer. After their defeat and the Philistines capture the ark, it goes from there to their Philistine city of Ashdod. After a time, they will move it from Ashdod to another Philistine city, Gath, and from there it will go to a third Philistine city, Ekron, before the Philistines wisely decide that the ark of the God of Israel ought to return to Israel. Who are these people called the Philistines? Well, they get their name Philistines because they come from the land of Philistia. And Philistia is one of those nations that occupied a portion of the land of Canaan even before Joshua leads the nation of Israel across the Jordan and in to occupy the lands that God will give to them. The Philistines are thought to have come from the island nation of Crete. They're a very fierce people, a seafaring people. They control trade in that part of the land of Canaan or Palestine. And they have, as a part of their economy, produce from the sea, produce from the grains in the coastal regions where they occupy, and their ability to be a trading partner with those who are traveling the highways going from going from Egypt and going up north. They have a number of cities that belong to them, but their five principal cities are Ekron, Ashdod, Ashkelon, Gaza, and Gath, all of which I have put in color for you in this map. The Philistines do not have a single king ruling from a single capital, as is the case with most monarchies. When the monarchy is eventually established in Israel and David becomes its king, he will eventually move the capital to Jerusalem, and from that point forward, that is where Jewish kings and kings of Judah will reign from. Not so with the Philistines. They have a confederation of 5 leading cities ruled over by 5 lords, and for the most part, when you read about the leadership of the Philistines in the Bible, they are referred to as lords. You will see in David's day a Philistine king, but that Philistine king will himself be in submission to the lords who have control even over him. And these 5 cities that these lords occupy are the garrison cities where the armies are raised and where the armies are stationed to protect the Philistines from threats. They will at various times occupy a considerable portion of the land given to the Israelites. In fact, depending on when in Israel's history, they may control and occupy as much as half of the land that was given by God to the tribes of Judah and also to the tribe of Simeon. They are used by God at various times to be a scourge against the Israelites because of the disobedience. And they're not going to be totally conquered and controlled at any time during the period of the judges. We see them being a real threat to Israel in the days of the judge known as Samson. But Samson, while he is a real scourge to them and a real problem, he never really eradicates the threat of the Philistines from Israel in his lifetime. And so they will have times in which they'll be a very strong and fierce enemy, depending on who God is using at the time to discipline Israel when they're unfaithful. Samuel will be a judge that has some success in controlling the Philistines for a while, but they're not going to be totally controlled. Even in the days of Saul, the first king of Israel, they don't seem to be a problem until they don't cease to be a problem, I should say, until we get into the reign of David. But that's a little further down than we're going to be able to cover in today's. Verse 2. The Philistines took the ark of God and brought it to the house of Dagon and set it by Dagon. The Philistines, like all the Canaanite nations, are a polytheistic nation. But as is the nature of polytheistic cultures, they have a primary god or a chief god, but they have other gods and goddesses as well. for them, their chief god is named Dagon. Now, Dagon is not a god of their own invention. Dagon was already a part of the Canaanite pantheon of gods within their mythology, and it's known that they brought him from ancient Babylonia. He is at this time the male god of fertility and also the god of war. The Philistines see him as their primary god. In Canaanite theology, he's thought to be the father of Baal. Baal, of course, will be the Canaanite deity that will figure in prominently in the coming years. Within Canaanite mythology, Dagon is going to be eventually himself supplanted by Baal, and Baal will then become the male god of fertility and the god of war. Dagon is usually depicted as a god that is half man and half fish. And the Philistines have a seafaring heritage and were dependent on the sea as a primary food source. So a pagan deity in the form of half man and half fish certainly expresses their belief that Dagon is the sustainer of their people. Not only the god of fertility, but the one who sustains them. However, it should also be noted that what he looked like and what form he took is a matter of debate. None of the most ancient references confirm the thought that he was half man and half fish, but it certainly seems that image has been around for a very long time, and at some point it is depicted in the way of half man, half fish in the artifacts found. Our text says that they took the Ark of the Covenant and put it in the house of Dagon. To put the Ark of God in the house of Dagon could be construed as their offering to Dagon for having given them a victory over the Israelites, but that doesn't really seem to fit with the text. It would probably be best to understand that the Philistines have a great respect and fear for the God of Israel, who has at times certainly been their nemesis and has defeated them. Consider all the times that Samson was a thorn in their side. Placing the Ark of the Covenant in the house of Dagon alongside of Dagon probably indicates that they now see themselves as being in possession of the God of Israel as a new idol for them, and therefore can expect that offerings made to him in the future will only strengthen their hands for any and all future battles that they have against the Israelites. He who owns the God has the power, so to speak. So this captured God of their enemies is now forced to be their God. And they have enough respect for the God of Israel that they choose to place the Ark of the God of Israel in the house of their chief god Dagon, and not just in his house, but to place the Ark beside their chief pagan deity Dagon. You know, their cultic misunderstandings have certainly warped their view of the true God of heaven and earth. And they may think that they are honoring both the God of Israel and their own chief god Dagon by putting the Ark of the Covenant in the house of Dagon beside the image of Dagon. But here's the question. If Dagon is their sustainer, their benevolent God who is the God of fertility and upon whom they depend, how well is he going to be able to sustain them in the weeks and months ahead of him? Well, that's what we're going to find out. Verse 3, when the Ashdodites arose early the next morning, behold, Dagon had fallen on his face to the ground before the ark of the Lord. So they took Dagon and set him in. It isn't just that the image of Dagon has fallen, but that he's found in a position of humbling himself in worship to the God of Israel. It's not even reasonable to think that a mild earthquake or tremor of some kind merely caused the idol to fall off of its pedestal so that it lands in a position prostrate before the ark. Well, we've already been told that the ark was placed beside the idol of Dagon, not in front of it. The Philistines would not have even done such a thing, as that would have implied that the God of Israel was greater than the God of Philistia. Now, they put him beside the ark, and yet in the morning they discover that Dagon has not only fallen, but somehow has managed to fall and then roll to the side so that it faces the ark while laying face down. And to be restored to his rightful place of dignity and superiority, Dagon is dependent on the priests of Ashdod to set him upright and return him to his place beside the ark. Verse 4, but when they arose early the next morning, behold, Dagon had fallen on his face to the ground before the ark of the Lord, and the head of Dagon and both the palms of his hands were cut off on the threshold. Only the trunk of Dagon was left to him. Well, once again, the image of Dagon is found in a position of humility, humbling himself in worship, as it were, to the God of Israel. But this time, his head has been cut off, and so have his hands. And it's not the idea that this time when the image fell, that those being the weakest points of the image, they're the first things to break. The original language won't support that. In fact, the word that's used in the original language literally is the idea of cutting off, of dismembering. Here is the head of Dagon that could never think at all anyway, could never see, could never hear, could never speak, and now is decapitated. We'd say today DOA. And the hands that could never provide, could never receive, could never protect, are amputated. What remains is a worthless carcass. What a powerful image to present to the people of Ashdod and to the priests who serve this God who is no God, the false god Dagon. Therefore, neither the priest of Dagon nor all who enter Dagon's house tread on the threshold of Dagon in Ashdod to this day. Their God has been dismembered, his head cut off, palms lay on the threshold to his own temple. That creates a huge problem for the priests and the people of Ashdod. It's a problem that super glue or duct tape can't take care of. The fact of the matter is, where these dismembered parts of their image has fallen has caused that part of the temple to be a place that no man can travel. They can't simply walk into the house from this point on without further desecrating the final resting place of their, well, maybe not so great god, Dagon. And so the writer is saying that even to the day of that writing, those who enter into the house of Dagon can't just cross the threshold. They have to find another way in. Verse 6. Now the hand of the Lord was heavy on the Ashdodites, and he ravaged them and smote them with tumors, both Ashdod and its territories. The expression, the hand of the Lord, is common throughout the Bible, and it's expressive of the powers of God to fight for Israel, or to punish Israel for idolatry, to punish individuals, but also to bless those who are trusting and who are righteous. However, here it is intended to be seen as a contrast to the powerless hands of Dagon that now lie severed on the threshold. It'll be impossible to see him as being beneficial or even as being vengeful any longer. A couple of things I want to point out to you. The tumors that are mentioned here certainly captivates our imagination. But when you look at chapter 6, verse 5, you'll also find that among the offerings that the Philistines are going to give as they send the Ark of the Covenant back will also be some images of mice, which makes me think that there's more going on here than just the tumors, that there is perhaps a mice infestation of their food stores. The tumors that are mentioned here are mentioned in a euphemistic way. What's really being discussed here are hemorrhoids. It is a word that refers, well, literally to swelling of the anus. And so these Philistines are having unimaginable miseries. And bear in mind that Ashdod is one of the royal cities. It's a significant part of the lands of the Philistines. It would have been a place that supplied and sustained not just the people within that town, but the surrounding villages and farms that were part of its territories. And so, like the plagues that smote all of Egypt, all the territories of Ashdod are ravaged. Verse 7. When the men of Ashdod saw that it was so, they said, the ark of the God of Israel must not remain with us, for his hand is severe on us and on Dagon our God. You know, it's not possible to know how long they kept the ark in Ashdod before they decided it would be best to have it removed. We know that it remains among the Philistines for a total of 7 months, and will be passed from Ashdod to Gath and then to Ekron during those 7 months. It's not explained to us exactly when the men of Ashdod saw that it was so. How long does it take a person to realize that what they're doing isn't working? How long does it take a person to realize that what they think is acceptable is abominable in the eyes of God? When God does a thing like what he has done here at Ashdod, a rational person is eventually no longer willing to mistake it for a freak occurrence of nature. From the morning that the priest of the house of Dagon found his image prostrate before the ark of God, they should have understood that their calamities are by the hand of God. And it comes to a place, we're seeing here in this verse, where the men of Ashdod understand that they are being afflicted by God, and even their God has been afflicted by God. You know, if you look back at chapter 3, verse 11, God had told Samuel that he was about to do a thing in Israel that would cause the ears of everyone who hears it to tingle. Well, those tingles seem to be reverberating and echoing all the way down to the Philistine city of Ashdod. Verse 8, so they sent and gathered all the lords of the Philistines to them and said, what shall we do with the ark of the God of Israel? And they said, let the ark of the God of Israel be brought around to Gath. And they brought the ark of the God of Israel around. You know, the people of Ashdod have had all of the ark of the God of Israel that they want. And perhaps the decision of the lords to send the ark to Gath was thinking that Gath is much further removed from the battle site in terms of distance. Maybe the God of Israel won't be as powerful. Or maybe the Lord who controls the city of Gath and its environs is making a confident boast that, hey, folks in Gath can deal with this. Or maybe they just think that what happened at Ashdod was coincidental to their possession of the ark of the God of Israel. Maybe they don't see the suffering that the Ashdodites see as the hand of God for what it is. There's no thought at this time of them sending the ark back to Israel. Pride won't let them do that. Pride won't even let them entertain that thought. It is theirs by reason of might. They took it in battle. They have no intention of doing something that would suggest weakness to others in Philistia or to those they have defeated. But they've come up against God, and they're soon going to realize they were defeated before they ever imagined defeat. After they had brought it around, the hand of the Lord was against the city with a very great confusion. And he smote the men of the city, both young and old, so that tumors broke out on them. You know, it seems that the description of the misery that falls to Gath by the hand of the Lord is even more intense than what had occurred at Ashdod. If they thought they had things figured out, this text tells us they don't. They're in a great state of confusion. They're physically now incapable of doing anything. And yet, the Philistines haven't quite learned the lesson that they need to learn. Verse 10. So they sent the ark of God to Ekron. And as the ark of God came to Ekron, the Ekronites cried out, saying, they've brought the ark of the God of Israel around to us to kill us and our people. They sent therefore and gathered all the lords of the Philistines and said, send away the ark of the God of Israel and let it return to its own place, so that it will not kill us and our people. For there was a deadly confusion throughout the city. the hand of God was very heavy there. And the men who did not die were smitten with tumors, and the cry of the city went up to heaven. Well, again, it seems as if the hand of the Lord has intensified each time the ark is relocated from one Philistine stronghold and leading city to another. If death was implied in the miseries at Ashdod and Gath, there's no implication here. The text plainly says that people are dying because the hand of the Lord was upon them. I find it interesting that this is the third time that we read in the space of 2 chapters, we read of a cry so loud that it's heard from a distance. First, it was when the ark came into the camp at Ebenezer, and the cry of the Israelites went up, and it was so loud the Philistines could hear it. Secondly, when the people of Shiloh cried out so loudly that Eli heard it and wanted to know its meaning. Now, it is the cry of those in Ekron, a cry even greater, and it ascends to heaven. And whether or not the idolatrous citizens of Ekron are praying to God with the correct understanding now that He is the God of heaven and earth and not constrained to a golden box, we don't know that, but we do know this. They are praying to God, and they're no longer praying to their own false gods. And there were things that they knew about God and could know about God because they knew about the accounts of what had happened in Egypt, and they've already admitted as much. And they knew about what happened at Jericho. And it's not inconceivable that they know enough to properly appeal to God in heaven rather than to the ark itself. You know, this chapter shows the severity of the hand of God against those who have oppressed His people. But other than an account of tragic things that happened a long time ago, is there anything here for us? Well, I can think of 3 things. Number 1, it shows us that God uses ungodly nations to discipline His unfaithful children. And that's been a pattern that we've seen from the very beginning of the period of the Judges. In fact, God had warned the prophet Moses that if they went after other gods in the ways of the peoples around them, He would use those very people to discipline Israel. And He has. Here's the point. If God kept promises made centuries earlier and made good on those promises, He'll keep the promises He made for all who are living in these last days. He will bless, and He will discipline, and He will judge. Number 2, it shows us that God will not reward or bless those who are idolaters. Turns out He's not in the box. And therefore, He's not an unknowing God, ignorant of what goes on beyond the curtains of His tabernacle. But at the same time, that box is the Ark of the Covenant of the God of Israel. And in mercy, He visits His people when they draw near to its presence. And just as Israel cannot restrain the hand of God by being in the possession of the ark, the Philistines found themselves to be just as powerless. Today, nations can legislate God out of the school systems, out of the courthouses, out of the branches of government, but that does not weaken God. And God will not continue to reward and bless a nation that thinks that God's laws are subordinate to their own. And number 3, it shows us that God will make Himself known by His power and might, and He'll do so even to the godless. And we live in a culture today that denies the power of God, but yet is strangely comfortable tolerating a tradition of God in our nation's history. We can deny His existence for a time, but when He demonstrates by the power of His hand that He's against us, we're going to face disasters, every bit as real as those faced by those Philistines of long ago. Those whom He allows to survive won't be denying Him any longer. What he does when his hand is against the ungodly today will be that which causes our ears and those around us to tingle. The fact is, God is holy, and we must treat him as such. All right, that is the conclusion of the 5th chapter and our lesson for today. Look forward to having you back with us the next time. You take care. You be safe. Keep studying. God bless.